In the ancient Germanic faith, there is a god shrouded in mystery. Most people who are familiar with this ancient faith know the familiar names of Odin, of Thor, of Tyr, of Balder, and many others. Few know of the god we will cover today. Fewer still know the true nature of this god. Today, we will unravel the mystery of the Germanic God Algiz, more commonly known as Alcis. Our journey begins with a brief passage from Germania by Publius Cornelius Tacitus. He writes, quote,
"For Suvia is parted by a continual ridge of mountains, beyond which live many distinct nations. Of these, the Lygians are most numerous and extensive, and spread into several communities. It will suffice to mention the most puissant, even the Arians, Helvecones, Manamians, Elysians, and Naharvalians. Amongst the Naharvalians is shown a grove, sacred to devotion extremely ancient. Over it, a priest presides apparelled like a woman, but according to the explication of the Romans, 'tis Castor and Pollux who are here worshipped. This divinity is named Alcis. There are indeed no images here, no traces of an extraneous superstition, yet their devotion is addressed to young men and to brothers."
This is the only officially known attestation of this Germanic deity. In order to discover the truth, we must analyze and critique Tacitus. I promise it will be worth it. Tacitus, who is praised for his ethnographic and anthropological works, is found lacking in the field of religious commentary, and that is for good reason. He uses a form of syncretism known as interpretatio Romana, which essentially states that the divines of every peoples on earth are secretly manifestations of the Roman divines. Partially this is due to his Platonic influence, where Plato in his Timaeus writes, quote,
"There is at the head of the Egyptian delta, where the river Nile divides, a city and district called Sais. The city was the birthplace of King Amasis, and is under the protection of the goddess Neith, or Athene. The citizens have a friendly feeling towards the Athenians, believing themselves to be somehow related."
In other words, Plato promoted the idea that the Egyptian gods were secretly the Greek gods, and that the Egyptian people knew of this, and also knew that they were descendants of the Greeks. This passage is the prelude to the known fabricated story of Atlantis, which takes the form and function of the Platonic noble lie, for a new origin story of the city of Athens. More on that in another video. One may be asking, what's the connection between a Germanic deity and delving into made-up Greek philosophy? The answer is that for the longest time, people took the words of Tacitus, the explication of the Romans, tis Castor and Pollux, who are here worshipped. This divinity is named Alcis, so seriously, to the point that they will proclaim it as evidence of the quote, divine twins archetype, everything's an archetype, close quote. But is it really? Tacitus, in a separate work titled Agricola, wrote of using this type of Platonic syncretism as a cultural and psychological weapon, used to enslave other peoples, so that they would willingly abandon their identities and traditions. Quote,
"The succeeding winter was employed in the most salutary measures, in order by a taste of pleasures to reclaim the natives from that rude and unsettled state which prompted them to war, and reconcile them to quiet and tranquility. He incited them, by private instigations and public encouragements, to erect temples, courts of justice, and dwelling houses. He bestowed commendations upon those who were prompt in complying with his intentions, and reprimanded such as were dilatory, thus promoting a spirit of emulation which had all the force of necessity. He was also attentive to provide a liberal education for the sons of their chieftains, preferring the natural genius of the Britons to the attainments of the Gauls, and his attempts were attended with such success that they who lately disdained to make use of the Roman language were now ambitious of becoming eloquent. Hence the Roman habit began to be held in honor, and the toga was frequently worn. At length they gradually deviated into a taste for those luxuries which stimulate to vice, porticos and baths, and the elegancies of the table, and this from their inexperience they termed politeness, whilst in reality it constituted a part of their slavery." Tacitus, Agricola 21. To them they are delivered by the gods, as it were, imprisoned and bound into our hands. Tacitus Agricola 32.
This is further compounded by the fact that Alcis is a real Latin word. Alcis is Latin for elk or moose. Take careful note of its conjugation. In Latin, much like other Romance languages, words are conjugated to indicate more information such as gender and quantity. If it were the quote, divine twins archetype, everything is archetypes, as perennialists and syncretists would have you believe, it should be in the plural. Instead, Alcis is conjugated in the singular masculine. What you are looking at, what Tacitus is communicating is an elk god. Alcis in the Latin, Algiz in Proto-Germanic. Alcis, Algiz. Note the eerie similarity in pronunciation. Now that we have properly identified this deity, we can now begin to look for more evidence elsewhere in folklore. It is well known that during the Christianization of Europe, in the early to mid-Middle Ages, the Catholic Church in the West would employ the same syncretism of Tacitus and Plato before them, and for the same aims. A well-known example of this is Saint Bridget, who was an ancient, well-known, highly loved, and widely worshipped Celtic goddess of the same name. Different tactics were employed by the Church to diminish the divinity of the native European gods, to rewrite history in the form and style of the Platonic noble lie, to utilize pagan divinities to aid in the conversion of the traditional pagan folk of Europe. In the case of Algiz, one has to go back to this early time of Germanic conversion to an individual named Hubertus. According to the Christian myth, Hubertus was a man who was a descendant of an ancient Germanic noble family. He was known for being exceptionally charming as well as exhibiting exceptional masculinity. In other words, Hubertus embodies the pinnacle of what a Germanic pagan man could attain. He was favored in the court of Æsiric III, king of the Franks. He married a beautiful woman, Floribin, daughter of Dagobert, Count of Leuven, the love of his life, his everything, and with whom was to have a child. Unfortunately, Floribin died during childbirth, and it broke the spirit of Hubertus. He set off into the woods, abandoning all of his familial, societal, and spiritual obligations. Though he was an exceptional hunter before this event, he became so skilled living off the land. Several years went by, which the distraught Hubertus never noticed. It was the thrill of the hunt, the struggle for daily survival, that kept his mind off of losing the woman he loved. By an ancient grove of thick pine trees along the border with Germania, he just caught a glimpse of a monster of a deer who went into the thick of the forest. Finally, he thought to himself, an animal to challenge my mastery of hunting. He crossed the threshold into this grove, listening to the birds, taking notice of the direction of the wind, listening to the sounds of the forest intently, using the pagan arts of augury and skills of a master huntsman. Suddenly, he heard the echoes of a great elk grunting through this ancient grove. Echoing through the trees, Hubertus pleaded to be given special sight to find this king of the wood, and his request was granted as a great and mighty elk appeared atop a hill close to him, possessing a rack with too many points to count, truly an ancient and giant stag worthy of being a king of stags. But in the middle of these horns was a symbol shining as intently as the sun within this dark forest. And according to the Christian myth, it was not the rune of life, but rather the symbol of a cross. And it was this alleged event that got him to go convert the pagans of the region to the worship of the Jewish rabbi, Yeshua. As a side note, this is where the symbol for the liquor company Jägermeister originated. This Christian myth follows the form and function of Christianized pagan deities. In essence, it is a noble lie or interpretatio turning the native gods of old into the saints and signs pointing to the god of the Judean desert, essentially communicating the revisionistic propaganda that even your gods worship ours, and so should you. It is our theory that this Christian myth, this noble lie, is a corrupted version of a legend relating to this ancient and mysterious Germanic god Algiz. This is but a mere introduction, and more research will be done. But now we have unpackaged and unraveled a mystery that has puzzled the revival of our true ancestral faiths today. Thank you for listening. Hail to Algiz!